Forecasting the wrong after repair value on a house can be seriously costly, and it's a really common mistake that people make. And people try to overcomplicate it, and it's really actually simple. I'm going to show you how I comp using software that's really available to everybody, like Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, Realtor.com, and I'm just going to get right into it. So I'm going to pick a property that's close to my neck of the woods in an area that I really like to purchase in. Okay, so this is a 2-bed, 1-bath, 1,025 square feet. And on all of these softwares, it's going to tell you what are the comps in the area. So when we're talking about comps, we're talking about comparable properties. What we're doing is finding the after repair value after you work on it, what it'll be worth, or real estate agents will call it a BPO, a broker's price opinion, or real estate agents and appraisers call it a CMA, a comparative market analysis. It's all the same stuff. We're trying to find comps because after we know what that house is worth, post fix up, we can figure out ultimately what we should purchase the property for. So here we go. It's showing me comparable homes. And what I'm trying to do is figure out how much that house is worth per square foot. All right, so I have one at $209 per square foot. I have another one at $203 per square foot. We have this one on Old Mission for $177 per square foot. I have another one for $222 per square foot, and finally one for $211 per square foot. Simple enough. Now I'm going to take an average of each one of those. So we're going to take my calculator, 209 plus 203 plus, and then we're going to divide that by 5 because we had 5 inputs if you remember your math classes. So $204.4 per square foot, multiply it by the square footage of the house, which is 1025, and there we go, 209,510. That's what that house would sell for after we've renovated it. Now, the first question you should be asking is, what is a comp? Did Zillow actually deliver us good comps? Probably not. So we're going to go through the 3 items that I use to identify what a good comp is. But first, I want to show you what happens when you don't get a good comp, when you use bad comps or you break the rules that we're about to go through. So this is a house that I did quite a few years ago now. But when we bought it, I was going to tear the roof off, build a second story. So that's the kind of work that we used to do. Now I do more like the work that we just looked at, which is not high-end stuff like this. Yeah, I used to do this kind of stuff. We tore the roof off, built a second story, did all kinds of nice stuff, built a 3-car garage in the back. And when I bought this, I had expected for it to sell for around $800,000. So you can see here that we listed it for $795,000. Based on the comps that we ran prior to purchasing that, we could go to market for around $800,000. And a couple months later, after it wouldn't sell, multiple price cuts, we ended up taking an offer for $667,500. I lost my butt big time on this one. I mean, lost money in the 6-figure range. Now, I made a lot of other mistakes on that, but the thing is that this thing was dead before it even started because I used wrong comps and I broke some of the rules that we're going to talk about today, and ultimately led to the worst investment I've ever made, an over 6-figure loss. So what is a good comp? There's basically 3 things that we're going to look at that make a good comp. That's the features, the dates sold, and the proximity. All right, so let's start with features. There's quite a few things when it comes to features. The first thing is the size of the property. So I want to pick houses that are within 200 square feet plus or minus. So taking this house here on Parkview, I'm going to look for houses that are 1,225 square feet, that's 200 plus, or I'm going to look for houses that are down to 825 square feet, 200 minus. Now on bigger houses, houses that are above 1,800 square feet, I might move that up to 400. Now, where do I come up with the 200 number? That's what appraisers use. And it's really important to use the same methods as an appraiser is using, because ultimately you're going to sell this house to somebody that's getting a bank loan. I doubt they're going to be buying it in cash. So if they're getting a mortgage from the bank is going to send out an appraiser to say what that house is worth, to make sure the bank's not giving too much money. And you really don't have a lot of say over what the bank or what the appraiser is going to appraise it at, except for I do have a dirty little trick that I hope the appraisers don't see at the end of this video. So first is square footage. And we're going to go 200 plus or minus, or on bigger houses, we might move up to 400 plus or minus. And one other point here is that basements and ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units, which have become popular these days, they are not going to count the same as above grade regular house square footage. Most appraisers count this as either 0 or 50% of the value of the rest of the square footage. So make sure that you're not counting basements and ADUs the same way. Next, we're looking at the specs of the house, the specifications. Number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms. Does it have a garage, a carport? Is it adjacent to a busy road, like a double yellow line road, a big road, or commercial properties? Next is style. You see, there's mid-century modern, there's craftsman style, there's farmhouse style, bungalow. Those are not all the same. Is it split level? You see, 2 stories is not the same as 1 ranch style home. That square footage is not equal. What about the finishes? Does it have a masonry finish, or is it a wood siding? All those things make the house not the same, i.e. not comparable. What about the generation it was built? A house from the 1950s is not the same as a house from the 2000s. What about the lot size? The lots should be similar. And finally, the condition. This is really important because remember, you'll be buying this house to add value to it through a rehab or a renovation, and then sell it for as much as you can sell it for on the market. But you're not comparing it to the types of houses that you're buying now. You want to look at the houses that are already renovated. That's what you're comparing them to. Okay, so let's look at these properties here that we're getting, that Zillow is comparing us to. So we got a 2-bed, 1-bath. Great. Let's see. What kind of shape is this in? Okay, looks like it's been renovated. We like that. Great comp, right? What about Carolyn? 2-bed, 1-bath. Great. Is it renovated? Yes, these are good comps. All right. Now, what about this one on Old Mission? It is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. So it doesn't have the same specs. Is this a comp? No, it's not. So we need to cut that one out. What about Shawnee Trail here? 2 beds, 1-bath. Great. What shape is it in? Looks like it's been renovated. Kinda. Ish. But I believe that's a good comp. The styles are similar with a garage, and ours has a garage. Okay, those things are all comparable. Now, we are going to talk about a fudge factor, as I call it, where we can use things that aren't exactly comparable, because ultimately you're going to run out of comps if you need the features to be exactly the same. There's just not that many sold houses within the date sold time range, which is the number 2 factor in identifying what a comp is dates sold, specifically sold. So you can't use for sales. Let's just take an example here, right? The houses were around $200 a square foot, but look at this one right here. I just clicked on lot lines there. This one's selling for $320,000 in a market that's not as great right now. We have $320,000 divided by the square footage of, well, it tells me right here, $230 a square foot. It's a bigger house, selling for $230 a square foot. They're not going to get that price. They're going to have to do some price cuts. There's going to be an inspection resolution. They'll probably have to lower their price in there as well. So you can't use something that is for sale. People can try to sell a house for whatever they want. That doesn't mean they're going to get that price. Now, in addition to that, you want to make sure that the date range in which you're looking at solds doesn't go too far back. I recommend 6 months as your baseline, especially in a volatile market. That means prices are going up quickly. You want to get as close as you can. I might even cut it below 6 months in a really volatile market. Now, once again, we're going to talk about some fudge factor with the date sold, but primarily 6 months is what we're going for, and it's got to be a sold, not a for sale. Now let's move to proximity. This is the most important factor, and there is no fudge factor here. The proximity means the neighborhood which it's in. And this is where some of the biggest mistakes happen. I've actually seen a house that got purchased by somebody from out of state where they didn't know the area that well, and they were comparing these houses that were selling around $350,000 each. And then they bought this house for $100,000. Great deal, right? And they asked our company to come in and assess the rehab, and it was going to be like a $115,000 rehab. Great deal for them, right? They'd be all in the acquisition price, $100,000, $115,000 for the rehab. They'd be in at $215,000 plus, all the other expenses and such. But let's say they had a lot of expenses. They'd be all in at $250,000, but it's going to sell for $350,000. That'd be a huge deal for them, right? Except it was in the wrong neighborhood. It was on the wrong side of the tracks, which is one of the common mistakes that I see people make. We're going to go through the list of those. But anyway, it was on the wrong side of a major boundary, which if you lived here, you knew that boundary. But they were from out of state. They had no clue that the houses just on the other side of that road made all the difference. And that house wasn't worth near $350,000. In fact, it wasn't even worth what they were going to have in it. And so they had to wait multiple years before they could sell that and not lose their butts on it. And so don't make that mistake. Neighborhood is terribly important. And there's 3 things that I look at to find out if the neighborhood is truly the same neighborhood. The first thing is just trusting your feel. Actually walking through, driving through the neighborhood, and you can start to see when things change. You want to look at when the houses start to have different styles, because a neighborhood is usually built at the same time by some developer, or at least they're close in style and age and size, and you can kind of feel when the things start to change. Or you can see obvious boundaries that you might not be able to see on a map, which you can do some of this stuff with Google Street View, but I sure as heck don't trust it as much as I trust my own eyes and ears. Now, factor number 2 in figuring out the neighborhood is looking at a map and looking for major boundaries like big roads, railroad tracks, waterways like rivers and creeks, parks, or any other obvious borders. And number 3, this is the key for me. Before I understood this little trick, I would make some big mistakes, and truly I never felt confident about the borders that I was setting, how I was actually setting neighborhoods. But if you add all of these 3 factors together, especially this last one, you can be pretty confident that you have identified the neighborhood. And what is that third one? It's census tracts. And I think this is what a lot of the different softwares out there use to identify a neighborhood. Okay, so this is the census tract interactive map. So let's look at that same property we were just looking at. Now, if I look at the map here, and I know this area really well, but what would I think the boundaries were? It would be really difficult to tell. This specific area, it changes a lot. So there are like 3 or 4 neighborhoods, even more in this zip code, that are really different from each other. There's like the area that we're looking at right now, I really love to buy in, but you go a few blocks up the road and I'm like, I'm not buying that unless it's like 30% discounted from the rest of the area. But you wouldn't know that unless you had a way to tell you, or true experience in that neighborhood. And then boundaries here, I have a major road here and a major road here, fairly major road right here. What's my boundary? Is it all the way over here? Well, I know from being in the area, this area over here is the one that I don't necessarily want to buy in. And so you can't do zip codes. A lot of people are going to do zip codes, and that's going to get you in all kinds of trouble. So let's look at the census tract map now. here's the neighborhood, Census Tract 33. So it crosses that major road and it catches all of this neighborhood down here, and it doesn't even go all the way down to the major street, which makes sense if you know the area. But here is a great example. You see, this census tract does pick up all that stuff that I said I don't like. And so it's a combination of the three things. I know that I actually want to cut this off right around here when I'm looking for comps. And so all three factors is what you need. And so let's use a different platform here. I'm going to use Trulia. All right, so here's a property in Colorado. Let's use the one next to it. Okay, so for one, notice that Trulia, same thing here. It's going to give me some comps. Great. Okay, now let's run this into the census tract. Now look at this census tract. Okay, I also know this area, and that does apply, but look at the comps that it's showing me. All right, we got some over here, and if I zoom in here, I know that the census tract is showing me Broadway, Yale, this street over here, which is South Franklin, and then Dartmouth. Okay, now if I'm there, one, I know these areas, and you can feel that the neighborhood's changing. Also, Dartmouth is a major street. The things on that side of the street are much different than this side of the street. Broadway is pretty obvious. It's a 4-lane road. East Yale is also pretty known. These would be questionable if you were there. I definitely wouldn't think that this area got caught. So without the census tract, I probably would draw a line right there. And anyway, so that means that I could use these comps, but these comps are all out. That is definitely not in our proximity. Okay, date sold. Some of these are further than 6 months out, so we want to be careful there. We would cut some of those out. And also, you see the features aren't the same. So these are 3 beds, 1 bath, 3 beds, 1 bath. So let's talk about the fudge factor. Okay, I can't just cut all of these comps out. Otherwise, I'm not going to have anything to compare it to. And I want to have 5 good comps. Now, if I have some really great comps, I might cut it down to like 3 instead if they are like spot on perfect. Now, as I've said about fudging the numbers, we are never going to fudge the numbers on proximity. That is what it is, and we don't mess with that. That's how you get yourself in big trouble. So let's talk about date sold. With date sold, we can actually move to 12 months pretty regularly, and I've even gone to like 18 months in some cases. Now, what I want to do if I'm going to push out, if I'm going to fudge the date sold, I want to make sure that the market's not changing drastically. Okay, so once again, you can do this on all the majors, but let's do it on Zillow. And on Zillow, I can go to see your home values. Okay, so I can put in the zip code. Now remember, zip code is not what we use to assess proximity, but this will do fine for what we're about to do. So I can see that the housing market here has gone up 5.5% over the last year. So let's take a house. Okay, so this area has only gone up 1.2% in the last year. All right, so a pretty stable market, not volatile. Volatile means that it's moving quickly. So I might not do any adjustments here, but just for the sake of this practice, let's say that I want to use this comp from about a year ago. Okay, South Cherokee, it sold for $369,000. It's a 1,016 square foot house. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 369,000. I'm going to multiply it by 1%, so 1.012%. Okay, that's what the house would have appreciated to over that year time based on the metrics that we have. I divide that by the square footage of the house, which was 1016. Now I have $367 per square foot is the value that I'm going to use for my calculation. All right, that's date sold. Now we're going to move into features and how you fudge the features. Also note this, I really only want to fudge one variable at a time. So if I'm messing around with sold date, I don't want to also mess with some features, and I only want to pick one feature at a time. So let's talk about bedrooms, bathrooms. I actually have this chart here. Okay, so bedrooms, bathrooms, garage, carport, a pool, fronting or backing to commercial or traffic. I also put in there just a reminder about the basement and the ADU. You don't want to count those. You either count them at 0 or 50%. But truly, I don't want to compare one house that has a basement or an ADU to another if I can avoid it. That would be like a last-ditch effort. But the bedrooms and bathrooms are pretty easy to do. So let's take a house that has, okay, here we go, Sherman Street. It has a 3-bed, 1-bath, comparing to my 2-bed, 1-bath. So what I want to do is look at my chart, and my chart says for a house over $500K, which this is over $500K, a bedroom is worth $20,000. So here we go. I'm going to take the sale price of $700,000. I'm going to subtract $20,000 from it. And then I'm going to divide it by the square footage, which is 1440, which, by the way, this would not be a good comp because the square footage is over 200 more than that one. But anyway, if we were using it, you would see that $472 per square foot is what we want there. And also a note on this one is it's got some kind of weird basement thing that is not comparable to the property that we're looking at, and so we would not use that as a comparison. Okay, but funny enough, it does lead to one of the common pitfalls that people run into, which I'm going to get to in just a second. I want to make sure that you understand that if we were looking at a property that was a 2.2 versus the 2.1 that we were just looking at, we would take $10,000 off and find the new value per square foot. Fronting or backing to commercial or traffic, that's another important one, but look at the chart, make sure that you adjust accordingly. We want to adjust one variable at a time. So you will run into comps that just look out of place. Now, you need to check yourself here because one of the common issues that people run into is a confirmation bias, which we're going to get to the common issues. And that basically means that you work your butt off to find a deal and you want it to work. But then it's a paradox because there are certain things that you'll look at and you're like, that seems like an out of place comp. So looking at this property, for instance, I'm looking at the comps here and there's this one that sold for $700,000. It's got the 1,440 square feet, so that one's pretty obviously not a comp for us. But you have, for instance, this one on Cherokee. Okay, well, that is not in as good of shape. Pretty obvious that that's not a comp for us. Okay, so look at this one here. It is 1,128 square feet, and it looks like a comp. All right, but this actually has like a much lower price per square foot than the other comps that we would use. And I know that because I already checked this out prior to. It was like sub 400 a foot, I think, versus like the others were coming out around $500 a square foot. And so I was trying to look into why is this one out of place or is it a good comp? And then I noticed that, well, this house is like really small. Okay, and they're calling it 1,150 square feet or something like that. And, that's what people will do is they'll want to add square footage, of course, if they can. And then I was looking and I noticed that it's got this Zinden. And I think that they're trying to count that square footage as livable square footage. So it's almost like it's not even an ADU. It's just some kind of bonus square footage outside, but you would not include that in the square footage of your house, which this leads me to the other little secrets when you see something that's out of place. So the first one is false square footage, just like this. It's ADU or basement square footage that is added to the total square footage price or the total square footage, and it skews your number of dollars per square foot. And so you have to find those things and delete those out or just not use the comp. Now, another thing that happens is sometimes the real estate agent will just ask the owner, like, how many square feet is it? And I've seen this a lot, depending on like where you're buying houses at, where you'll see a lot that have like really round numbers, like it's 1,200 square feet or 1,400 square feet or 1,350. And that always tips me off that, well, maybe the seller just said what their square footage was, and it's not the actual measurement. Now, you obviously can't go around measuring all these comps every single time, but if something seems out of place, then you might start questioning it. Another thing that will throw off prices, low or high, is if it was bought in a package. So if somebody bought that house with 5 other houses, and let's just say that they bought 5 houses for $1 million. Well, they may go and just put $200,000 across all 5 houses. A million divided by 5 is $200,000 each. And, they may do that for ease when obviously some houses are worth more than others. And so that may be where a wrong value comes from. Or I've actually seen, a mess up in the records where they bought like a house and another piece of land and they put all of it on, the whole purchase price on the house. Another thing is they sold to a related party. So maybe they sold to a relative and obviously gave them a great deal. That could throw off your comps quite a bit. And another thing is just buying in cash. They might be an investor who got a great deal on a house. Now that is a comp, but it is something for you to be aware of. Okay, and then one other thing that you might look for if you see prices that are really off is it would be what we call an odd bird. So there are a handful of things that lead to what we call an odd bird. One is unusual architecture. Maybe it's got like a whole different roof line than anything else. It's got a flat roof. Everything else has like architectural style roofs. Maybe it's got a different building material than anything else. Maybe it's like an octagon house. I've seen that. It just doesn't fit anything else. Number 2 is a lot is irregular. Maybe it's too steep of a lot. Maybe it's on a hill. Maybe it's way bigger. Maybe it's laid out differently. Maybe there's something that makes that lot way different than the rest. The layout of the house is weird. Maybe it's got low ceilings. Maybe it's got like a tremendously small kitchen or bathrooms that are unlike anything else in the neighborhood. Maybe something's wrong with the street. Maybe it is a very busy street. Maybe it's butted up to some commercial property. And, we talked about this as some of the factors already in the features, but maybe it's specific to this one property and it kind of throws off all of the comps. Neighbors. So I've actually went to buy houses that I thought everything looked great. And then I pulled up to the house and the neighbors got like trash all throughout the yard. They have like tarps on the roof, like almost looks like a different place just in that one area, on that one street. Like the whole street might be different. I've like seriously driven up to houses where I'm like pulling up and I'm like, gosh, this is going to be such a great deal. And then I turn down that lane and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in like a different country right now. Next is infrastructure. So talking about things like power lines, retention ponds, railroad tracks, highway noise. Maybe it backs up to a highway. I know we talked about busy roads, but I've actually purchased houses where it was like the house was next to the woods and everything was fine. It was a nice, peaceful house. But then wintertime came and all the leaves fell down, and I noticed that we were backed up to an interstate. Definitely hurts the value of a house. And finally, scene of a crime. So in some states, they actually have to disclose this. Others, they don't. But if somebody's been murdered in the house, if suicide has been committed in the house, it's definitely going to affect the value of the home if people know about it. Maybe it was the scene of a famous crime. That will also affect the value. Now, there are also issues that make a house what I call dead on arrival, DOA. That means that I'm not going to purchase it. I don't care how good of a deal it is. I do not want it. The first is being in a flood zone in an area where all the houses aren't in a flood zone. So there are like houses down in Florida or Louisiana, and they're all built to be in a flood zone. So people expect that. But there's areas in, for instance, the South where I'm at, where it's like the neighborhood's fine, except for there's a few houses that are in a flood zone. However, they're built like all of the other houses. They're not prepared to be in a flood zone. And so it, makes them susceptible to damage, but more importantly here, it lessens the value. And here's how. see, the person who purchases it is going to have to get flood risk insurance, which, like, I've seen it be $100 to $200 a month. But, somebody who's getting their mortgage, they're approved up to a certain amount, and that's all based upon what they can afford every month. So if they have to get flood risk insurance, which the bank will know this, that's part of their underwriting process, they're going to have to then deduct the $100 to $200 a month that's going to cost. That lessens the amount of loan they can get pretty considerably, and ultimately just lowers the value of your house, because everybody will be running into that issue unless they're buying with cash, but that would be rare for your end buyer. Next DOA item are parcel issues, as I call it. So this would be like an easement that goes through your property. Now, there are some houses that I'll buy with an easement, but they have to be like down the side of the property and not in the way of the property at all. But just think about somebody who's coming to buy the house. They want to be able to do whatever they want with the property. And if there's an easement that doesn't allow them to do that, that's going to be a problem. And, most areas, at least the ones that I've worked in, have like interactive GIS maps. So I'll show you. Let's just go through this one that we were looking at earlier. Okay, so for one, on here, there's other ways to find FEMA maps, which are the flood zone maps. So we're looking for the 100-year flood zone, and see, we're good here. Now I can see the flood zones around here. That's the blue. Let me check it off, check it on. All right, so we're safe on flood zone. Once again, there's other ways to find the flood zones. But now I'm going to come in and I'm looking for easements. So I don't see any easements here. We're good to go there. Next thing I'm going to look for are zoning issues. So I want to know, mainly, does the zoning of this area match what I'm buying? Okay, so this is an R1 zoned area. See, R1. That here means single family home. Okay, so that means that I'm buying a single family home that's in a single family home zoning. Good to go there. But there are times where I might see a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex that is in R1 or single family home zoning. And in some cases, that means that they will make you convert it back to, or not even back to a single family home. And so you really need to know your municipality's rules on all that kind of stuff. But if I don't know for sure, I ain't buying it. Okay, now the final thing here is I'm looking for setbacks, and really if I'm built on a setback. So there have been houses where, this is the lot line here, and the house is actually built on it. And you got to know that each zone has specific rules on the setbacks. Like some have to be built within, outside of 5 feet from the line, or, maybe the front has to be 25 feet. But if it's built inside of that, if you go messing with it at all, you might be subject to having to like tear it down and build it in the right way. And once again, there are people who know the rules really well, and I'm not one of them. Therefore, I just don't buy it. I'm just going to walk away completely. And in fact, even if I did know it, I probably would still walk away, because you are subject to, people's opinions about it, like up at the municipality. And I don't really want to leave things to chance. And so I just don't buy it. It's a DOA. Next are some Oddbird issues. So we went through the Oddbirds, the misfits earlier, and most of those things aren't deal killers for me. They are get a better deal kind of thing, but not a deal killer. The things that are deal killers for me are low ceilings. Never going to buy a house that's under 7.5 feet ceilings, because the house is just never going to be worth the same. And it's really hard to find the right comps and such. So I just walk away from them, with the caveat that if I'm buying it as a rental and I'm never planning on selling it, then I might buy a 7-foot ceiling house if it's a great deal. But for a flip, certainly not, unless I was going to vault the ceilings, but that's not really the thing that we do. Next, Oddbird issue is a weird build. I alluded to the octagon house before. That actually comes up where there's like a oddly, eclectically built house in a neighborhood. Somebody had the means to build something strange and just walk away from it. You don't know what it's worth. There's nothing to compare it to. There's a quote from Warren Buffett: "Never invest in a business you can't understand." So early on, I'm not sure if he still does. I'm not really a stock investor, but he wouldn't invest in any of the tech companies because he just couldn't understand the company. He didn't understand how value was being built. And I look at houses and properties the same way. If I don't understand it completely, if there are questions about it, I'm just walking away. There's other houses that I can buy that I fully understand, that I have full comps for, that make a lot of sense. Okay, now we're going to go through the process here in a second, and I'm going to give you my little appraiser trick. But first, I want to go through the 3 common mistakes that people make. First is the wave. This is speculative ARV. Okay, so basically it's like this. This is the market. Here's the market. It's going up in value. This is value. This is time. And you know it's going up. Maybe it's going up by 5-10% a year. We're in a crazy market. And you're purchasing the house right here. Obviously, you'd actually be purchasing it down here because you got to do like the whole value add thing, where you do a renovation. Obviously, you're going to buy it down here, but you'd expect after you've done the renovation, you've added value and you've brought it up to here. That's the renovated ARV. And let's just say that number is $300,000. Okay, great. That's how you comp houses. You figure out what it's going to be worth after you're done working on it. But you know that the market is going up by like 10% a year right now. And you're thinking that the renovation is probably going to take you like 6 to 8 months. And so what you do instead, being a speculative ARVer, is you say, well, in a year, that house is going to be worth like $330,000. It's going to take me like 8 months. So let's just say 320. And so instead of using the ARV that it would be right now, you use the speculative ARV, assuming that this is going to keep going up. This is what I call the wave. And well, folks, it doesn't always keep going up. In fact, we're kind of running into that right now where it stopped going up. And I see a lot of investors have their ARV being speculative. And this will crush you when you get caught in a market that doesn't keep going up. Next common issue is confirmation bias. I touched on it earlier, but you do a lot of work to find these deals, and people feel like the deals are scarce, and you end up trying to make the deal work. So you take out comps that should be comps because they kind of lower your ARV, and you just have to have an unbiased opinion on it. And if you can't do it, get somebody else to look at it. Get a third party in there. Get a real estate agent to look at your comps and confirm, or get another friend that is an investor to look at them, or just, have some control over yourself and make sure that you're doing it unbiased. And number 3 is the wrong side of the tracks. Guys, this is the biggest one. Do not let yourself pick comps that are not in the same neighborhood, and work really hard to understand what that neighborhood is. I'm not knocking the out-of-state investors out there. I would personally never do it. Even going through some of the comps that I went through for this video, I think back to the actual area and I'm looking at it on a map and I'm like, man, I would not know if I didn't live there. And a Google map, even in the town that I'm in right now, the Google map does not do justice. I know where those borders are when I drive through. It's really obvious to me. But when I look at them on a Google map, I'm like, I don't really know. All right. And then the appraiser trick. Now, you want to make sure you get an appraiser who gives you a great appraisal, because the higher they appraise your house, the more sure you are that that buyer is going to get the loan that they're going for, that they ultimately need to buy your house. So if I have questions on whether I'm going to hit that number or not, what I want to do is be able to talk to that appraiser and kind of show them the benefits of the house, like all the things that I've done. Like, hey, I don't know if you noticed this, or I don't know if you saw that house up the street that, sold for X, Y, and Z. And ultimately, I want to make friends with them. But they don't tell you when they're going out there, and you can't just sit at the property all the time. And so what do you do to be able to have the opportunity to talk to that person and let them know what you've done and the way that you're seeing it? Well, here's the trick. What I'll do, I don't do this all the time. I haven't done it in a long time, but when I was just flipping one property at a time, it was like so important that everyone worked exactly as planned. So what you do is you would take the keys out of the lockbox. So don't use any special lockboxes here, just your old school one that you can get up at the hardware store. And you take the key out and kind of sit up the street. And then, they'll, of course, call, because you'll know what day the appraisal is happening. So you might hang out at a coffee shop that day or something. But anyway, you'll get the call that, hey, there's no key in there, and then just bring it down there, and then you can have the discussion that you would like to have. Now, let's go through the actual process itself, the 5 steps on how I actually comp these properties. We will pick the example that we've been going through, but before I do that, there is one more thing that I want to show you. Let's use realtor.com this time. Okay, so this is one of the first properties I ever bought, and I didn't actually realize this, and it makes me wonder how I was comping properties back in the day. I guess I was probably getting with a real estate agent, but you see here that this property only has real estimates, which I didn't know what that meant, but of course I'm looking for sold comps, not their real estimates, and I couldn't find it in there. So I started researching a little bit further. Let's go to Redfin as well as one that we can use. Okay, it's got its Redfin estimate, but I have no sale prices. I only have last list prices, which a list price is no good to me, because remember the example before, you can list it for whatever you want. That doesn't mean they actually got that. And that's when I found out that certain states are non-disclosure states. That means that when the house sells, they are not required to report that amount. And so the only way to find the actual sold price is to have access to the MLS, the multiple listing service. This is what real estate agents use. All right. But you might not be a real estate agent. Therefore, you don't have access to that. So in this case, you won't be able to use one of the free platforms. You'd actually have to pay to play. So, I'm not trying to be a advocate for one or the other, but this is the one that I use. And now I have actual comps, and these are the sold prices. Purchase price $330. So once again, you'd have to pay to play in that scenario. Now let's go through the actual process step by step. 5 steps here. Number 1 is look up the subject property on Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, Realtor.com. I'm going to use Zillow. That's the one that I've always used, unless I'm using the one that I pay for. But note this. 2 things here I'm going to tell you before we get into this. One is, most of the time I don't use any of the stuff that I showed you. I'm going to go real quick here, and I'm just going to look at the comps, and I'm going to say, oh, these are about $200 a square foot. I don't see anything that is too far off. So, I'm figuring $200 a square foot times the 1025. Man, that'd be cool, huh? 1025 times $200 a square foot, 205, whatever. I'm going to be in the low 200s. This is an important piece. Okay, we've talked before about the scale of livability. So every neighborhood, you're going to have these sales, and these are the different sales. So these sold from $30 to $60 a square foot, 60 to 90, 90 to 120. You have your different sale ranges of actual dollars. So you could do the same thing in square footage. But I just want to give you the point here that you see different groupings of where stuff sold for. And, so the lower end here, these are bombed out properties. This middle is barely bankable. That means a bank would give them a loan because it's a livable property, but it's really outdated. It's not something that you would want to fix that up. And then you have your range of comps. That's what we're looking for here, is the ARV, the range of ARV comps. And here is the scale of livability. So that is just this broken down to a spectrum. So I have my bombed out houses, just like these. I have my barely bankable, just like these. And then I have my range of comps. And when you're flipping houses, you're buying in bombed out or barely bankable, and you're moving it up into the range of comps. Now, this is a range. It is not a number. So around the low 200s is a good enough range for me, because it's the rest of the things that I'm going to do in the project that are going to determine where I'm at in that range. You see, I'm going to try to push it up to the top of that range. How am I going to do that? I'm going to do that through different techniques on how I build the scope of work, different techniques on how I actually do the renovation and present the property, and then the actual listing and the digital introduction, as I call it. And that's how I'm going to get the most money possible. You see, I can get 5 to 10% extra on that sale just by listing it correctly. And that is why don't freak out. Don't get analysis paralysis about getting the exact number and, oh, did I fudge this right? Did I use all those things right? Nah, just act. Find something that is in the right range and then make it work. Now, you don't want to be silly about it, but a lot of people don't take action and actually get in this game because they get scared about all these different factors. Don't. Buy the house if it makes sense. Now, we do want to be prudent, so we're going to go past step 1 here, of course. Sorry, that's step 2, is doing the quick comp. Now, I also am going to do a quick Google map view walk. Okay, and I just basically want to make sure that nothing is terribly off in this neighborhood. Like that house wasn't out of place. Like really what I'm looking for here is, am I wasting my time? I don't want to waste my time going through comping this if it's going to be a crappy house in the first place. Because ultimately I am going to go through the fudge factors and all that to find the right comps if I know I'm going to buy the property. But I want to go through these initial things first. So I've done the quick comp and I found out, oh yeah, that would work for whatever price is being offered to me at, or I could start the conversation with the seller, knowing the ballpark range that I was in. And then I would have to go through my DOA check. Now, number 1 DOA is the flood zone. I showed you how to do that. We actually already did it, so I'm not going to do it again. This house is not in a flood zone. I did a parcel check, and this house is good on its parcel issues. That's easements, setbacks, and zoning. Now, there are some places where it's probably not as easy to get access to all that stuff. You may actually have to go up to the courthouse. If you are in one of those locations, I would just ask the seller about it. Like, hey, do you have any of those issues? I'm going to confirm them if we go under contract, but wait to do that extra work until you actually have a contract, because you'll probably be looking at multiple properties per week, and you really don't want to waste your time with all that. And number 3, low ceilings, odd build. So I already did the street view to see if I have an odd build, which I do not. It's a very normal build. Now I'm going to look at 7-foot ceilings. Now, if you have pictures, here's the indicator, is always above doorways. A doorway is going to be 80 inches, which is just under 7 feet. And if I have around a foot above that doorway, I know that I have normal height ceilings or better. But if I have a ceiling that's right above the doorway, I know that I have an issue. Now, I don't have interior pictures of this house, but I can tell that here's the gutter right here, and there's obviously about a foot in between where the gutter is. That would be about where the ceiling is and the top of that doorway. So I'm good on 8-foot ceilings there. Let me get you an example. There we go. Look at that whole foot there. See how we got space over there, space over here. And knowing this neighborhood, I think pretty much all the houses have 8-foot ceilings, so I'm not going to find anything there. Okay, we're good on the DOA check. Now I'm going to identify 3 to 5 good comps. Use the fudging factor if I need to. Now, instead of just using this comparable home, I'm going to go sold. Price, don't really care. I want 2 beds, 1 baths. I'm not going to use exact match because remember, we'll fudge if we need to. Only want houses. I only want things sold within the last 6 months for now. And remember, we can fudge if we want. Now, here's the house right in there. Now, remember that census tract. Okay, here's the census tract. Now, because of the other factors of proximity, I don't really like using all that. I would use this stuff over here and really like a circle right around here is what I'm going to go for. And so on Zillow, this is going to make it really easy. I'm just going to go basically right here. Okay, and it kind of pops up all of the comps over here. Get some square footage going because we don't want to go too big here. Let's go 1250, 750. Okay, Colonial. That was a good comp for us. So we looked at it earlier, if you remember correctly. It's got a garage. Okay, so here we go. I got Colonial, and that is, there we go, $203 a square foot. Next property, Woodvale. That's a 3-bed, 1-bath. Let's use that thing. So remember the Fudge rules here. $10,000 for a bedroom. So let's go 234, 700 minus 10,000. Good. And that's 1243 square feet. So we're at 181 per square foot for Woodvale. Yeesh. Am I missing anything? It's not quite as nice as we might make ours, but whatever. Shawnee Trail. Okay, 986. Now this is an important thing about square footage, which I don't think I said earlier, especially if you're going to end up having to fudge square footage, which we obviously won't need to on this one. But the smaller the house, the more you're going to get per square foot, and vice versa. Why is that? Because at the end of the day, a house is simply a kitchen and a bathroom. Everything else is extra. So in a smaller house, a higher percentage of that square footage is kitchen and bathroom. Whereas you get into bigger houses, you have longer runs of rooms and such. And so the price per square foot is more diluted. Just important for you to consider, especially when you start fudging the square foot numbers. Okay, so is this a comp? Yes, it is. I'm not going through everything on the checklist. You can do that if you'd like, but I'm kind of lazy about this stuff. $222 a square foot. Jeez. Shawnee Trail, we're at $222. Now, I know I said 5, but I want to spare you guys, so you don't need to do all 5. Let's just look at this one real quick, though. See, that is not a comp because it's not in good shape. Okay, now what I would do if I couldn't find any is I might go to 3 beds. Okay, I found this one over on North Moore. That looks nice. Notice it's got the 1,100 square feet exactly. That tips me off that did somebody give them that price. All right, let's just take these here. We got 203 plus 181 plus 222. There's 3 of them divided by 3, so we have 202 per square foot, and then multiplied by, what's our subject property? 1025. What does that give us? Times 1025 equals 207.50. So that is about what I think the ARV is going to be in that area. Now there's a couple other things that I'm going to do before I call that good. And that is doing a neighborhood scan. So I'm going to look for out of place sold prices. I'm looking for Oddbirds, bought in package, bought by relative. All right, I'm not looking for those things. I know that those are the factors that usually lead to an out of place sale. So it's really simple for this. I just go here and I go to lot lines and I just look, is there anything that seems off? No, not particularly. All these prices seem to be within range. And then remember, you're looking through the comps like we just were. You would be looking, let me do it for you. Let's get in there. Let's do solds. Let's do anything in the last 12 months. I'm extending it a little bit just because I'm looking for anything that's odd. Okay, 278 is pretty expensive for one of these houses. No, it's 4 beds. 258. That's a pretty nice house on a busy street. Okay, everything looks normal to me. Now, once again, it is a range. Don't get tied up and worried about getting the exact number. It's not 207.50 that this house is going to sell for. It's like in the low 200s, just like when I did the quick comp, by the way. Going through all the steps didn't get me anywhere closer, and I'm not trying to be exact, so the range does just fine for me. I know I can go out and make an offer based upon this number, and I can feel confident about it. And I know that really when I take this thing to market, because I'm going to do a better renovation, I'm going to make a smart scope of work, I'm going to do the big three that's really going to pop this thing off, and then I'm going to have a phenomenal digital introduction that is going to get me up to 10% more on a sale of a home. And I just went through this with a house where we didn't do anything different to it. We just listed it using our rules for a digital introduction, and we're going to list it for $30,000 more than we had initially. And I made a whole video about how to do a digital introduction the right way, and you need to check it out. That's going to help you get the most of that range. And thanks for tuning in, guys. Talk to you soon.